Dragon Ball Z Kakarot's final DLC was DAIMA Pack 2, which graced us with Super Saiyan 4 Goku DAIMA, Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta DAIMA, and of course the whole boss battle with Giant King Goma. Ever since that DAIMA pack, we haven't really heard anything else since, especially in terms of whether it will be the final DLC pack or if there are others coming. Apparently there was also a recent flyer which showed off all the apparent active games, which showed off Dragon Ball Sparking Zero and others, but didn't really include Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. While this technically isn't confirmation of everything, it to me doesn't really bode well for an upcoming DLC soon, but that's not exactly an impossibility. Anyway, the reason I'm making this video is because apparently Dragon Ball Z Kakarot 2, or at least a sequel to Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which would be I guess Dragon Ball Super Kakarot, was recently talked about, albeit briefly, at a Japan Expo. I recently saw Dragon Ball Hype post DBZ Kakarot 2 covering the entirety of Super with manga elements would be absolutely peak. Good to know that there is at least a possibility of this happening in the future. Now, what tweet was that in context towards? Well, apparently at Japan Expo, the president of CyberConnect 2 was asked about the development of Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Specifically, they were asked whether they plan to release a Dragon Ball Z Kakarot 2, to which they says that he remained very evasive, neither saying yes nor no, so no info or hints at all. He just said they're working very hard on their anime licenses. And while this is disappointing, at least someone asked a question. But this kind of begs a question in terms of whether or not we'll have a more further DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, or if we'll have an actual sequel which will take into account the Super timeline. Now realistically, I think that there are a few options. For one, I think that if they still plan on adding DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which is not impossible because they never actually said DAIMA was the final pack, then it would just depend on whether or not they include GT, or rather the Dragon Ball Z movies, as further DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which I guess sounds weird for GT, but for the movies it's still technically possible because you have the legendary Super Saiyan Broly, you have the Dragon Ball Z movie 12 movie with Super Gogeta. So technically speaking, if they feel it's profitable enough, they could do it like a perhaps a nod or a final DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which would include the movies. Although it's whether or not that's likely is another thing that remains to be seen. With the whole Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 hype, I don't really see them doing that or making any type of announcement until 2027 or late 2026, and that's just me trying to be positive. The other thing to consider is that they're still remaking, or I guess remastering, Dragon Ball Super, so they could try and do a Dragon Ball Super Kakarot in 2028 or so. Realistically, it's very hard to really understand how Bandai is going to handle this because you have several different games that are all focused on a certain thing, and Dragon Ball Z Kakarot is definitely focused more on the story. But yeah, overall, I think that the fact that they never said no, that there's not going to be any type of Dragon Ball Z, that there isn't going to be any type of sequel or DLC for the DLC, is a good thing because it leaves things within the realm of possibility. But we can speculate all we want, but the fact of the matter is we don't really have much. But yeah, I just wanted to share that information because, quite frankly, we haven't really had much things to say. Yeah, we have Xenoverse 3, but we don't know. At least someone asked. Slowplays also does bring up a good point that reminded that we do not have a complete, fully fleshed out Dragon Ball Super story in any Dragon Ball game right now, and he's right. That's not really fleshed out in Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. It's certainly not fleshed out in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and obviously it's not fleshed out in Dragon Ball FighterZ, and it likely won't be fleshed out in Xenoverse 3 because of the whole time or future stuff, however they plan on doing that. In the comment section below, I want you guys to let me know if you think it's more likely that we'll get further DLC for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which could show off the movies or some other type of series, or if you think that they're just gonna focus specifically on Dragon Ball Super Kakarot, a sequel to the original Kakarot, and potentially release it 2028, 2029. My hands are tied. I don't know what's gonna happen, but yeah, just this quick video.